TCU, which is Texas Christian University, in Fort Worth, where she concentrated on contemporary art. At SAMA, Lana has curated Marilyn Lanphier, Material Memory in 2018, and served as co-curator for several recent exhibitions, including Of Country and Culture, the Land Collection of Contemporary Australian Aboriginal Art, which was in 2017. Then also Capturing the Moment, photographs from the Marie Brenner and Ernest Pomerantz collection in 2019. And most recently, Texas Women, A New History of Abstract Art, which is currently on view through September 6th. Please, if you haven't seen it or you only saw it once, check it out again because it's going away soon, but it's such a gorgeous exhibition and there's lots to learn. Without further ado, here's Lana Meador.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for this program. And thanks to Johanna Tesfaye and the education team for coordinating this program and so many new virtual programs that we've been doing this spring and summer. It's been a wild ride, but we're so happy to be able to do this in this format. I want to thank especially our members who are participating with us tonight. We really appreciate your support now even more than ever. And I want to acknowledge the Louis A. and Francis B. Wagner Lecture Fund, which makes this program and so many others lectures at our museum possible. So we're really appreciative of that fund. As Johanna mentioned, this presentation with Annette Lawrence is part of our Texas Women exhibition programming, which I was honored to co-curate with Suzanne Weaver, our curator of modern and contemporary art. And that does close September 6th. We were thrilled to be able to extend it this summer after the pandemic closure closed the exhibition in the museum. So please do take a chance to come see it in person if you're able. And now I will introduce Annette Lawrence, who I'm delighted to be here and to speak with in conversation and share her work. Annette poetically transforms everyday materials and raw data into abstract compositions. She taps into the visual, emotional, and psychological potential of our personal and shared experiences as she explores memory, daily life, and the passage of time. These are subjects that I think have become particularly poignant during our current moment when we're all experiencing isolation in this time of quarantine and figuring out new ways to connect and share. Annette was born in Rockville Center, New York, but she's currently based in Denton, where she Hi.
Hi.
Lived in Denton, Texas for many years. And she was a professor of studio art at the University of North Texas for 23 years, which she just retired from that position. She has a BFA in sculpture from the University of Hartford and an MFA in painting from Maryland Institute College of Art. She's received numerous prestigious awards and fellowships and residencies, including a McDowell Fellowship, the Camille Crosby Award for African American Artists in residency at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine, and the Core Residency Program at the Glassell School of Art. She's represented in many public collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Dallas Museum of Art, and the Rachofsky Collection, as well as the corporate collections of American Airlines and the Dallas Cowboys. Her work has been included in numerous exhibitions across the country, including the 1997 Whitney Biennial, the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, and Project Row Houses, also in Houston, among many others. And of course, she is on view right now at the San Antonio Museum of Art in Texas Women. It's my great pleasure to be in conversation with Annette Lawrence tonight. So let's take a look first at the installation at SAMA. Oh. Annette, are you there? I can't see you, but I think
I am here.
Okay, good. Oh, there you
Thank you. Thank you for that great introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. Here's a couple of installation shots from the exhibition at SAMA, which includes works from the Exception series, a recent series body of work. I wanted to start off and just read a quotation that I thought, was really relevant to this body of work and your work in general. You said, "I learned that who's counting determines what is counted and how. It became my goal to always assess what's being counted, who's counting, and how they are counting." So your work is very much about recording, noting, taking this, information and data and transforming it and making a record of memories or passage of time or an experience. Maybe you can just share with us, the background in this body of work we have on view.
Sure. This body is, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. This work is a record of a relationship by phone over a 6-month period. I used my phone bills with all the itemized information on that to make these grids. But I want to just sort of go back to what you were just saying about counting. And I think that my original interest in counting came from noticing the omission of contributions of African-American people and women and many, many others in what I learned in my formal education. And that's how I came to focusing on counting and record. And among other influences, that was one of the things.
If we go to the next slide, there's a video to kind of give everybody a sense of the installation. And if you haven't been to see it, it's in its own discrete kind of room at the very end of the exhibition, which I really am happy with how that turned out. And it kind of creates this nice like coda to the whole show and this kind of really contemplative, meditative space to view these really intimate works that are about an intimate conversation and relationship between two people. But yet then they kind of have this expanding, more universal, appeal there too. I imagine through your process, kind of this repetition of creating these drawings, it's a meditative process for you, right?
It is, yeah. So there's something very the same about each of them, but also there's an unknown as I'm making the drawings. I don't know exactly where the filled in areas in the drawing are going to land. So each one is a mystery until it's complete. And then once it's finished, there's a similarity, but there's also, each one is a unique image.
So if we go to the next slide, we kind of can walk through maybe how you take something like a phone conversation and translate it then into an abstract, piece of art.
Yeah.
So this is maybe, one of the first parts of the composition where you're kind of, putting out there the duration and frequency of the phone calls on a piece of graph paper, correct?
Right. So on this drawing, this is February of 2018?
19,
yeah. And it looks like I have
time ago.
Yeah, looks like across the top there's the days of the month, and down the bottom there's I think the hours, and I just filled in the time periods that I was actually on the phone on this square grid, and from the square grid it's easy to change, to transfer it into radial coordinates, which make a circular grid. So in the exhibition, there's the same information in 3 different ways. Each grid is a square grid, and then a circular grid there, and then the inverse in indigo is there as well.
And that indigo is so beautiful and rich. And, I noticed in your work, there's often, a limited palette. You choose color very sparingly, but I'm sure it has quite a lot of weight and meaning when you do choose it. What drew you to do this particular conversation and that inversion with the indigo?
Well, I felt like the circle grids in this case were not, they were sort of spare. I enjoyed looking at them, but I felt like there needed to be more. And so flipping them, making them negative was the way I did that. And using indigo is just a color that I use. It's one of my favorite colors, and it has a lot of gravity. Feels, I mean, those indigo pieces remind me of like celestial maps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that kind of progression. It's almost like you're looking, at celestial bodies in the night sky, constellations, and kind of gives you this, you're thinking about the macrocosm, but also inward at this personal conversation in the microcosm at the same time. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
And here's maybe how it all begins, is that right? With you kind of mapping out the different kind of ways of looking at the data and your personal experience.
Right. Yeah, this is something I was just curious about after drawing the charts. Just actually writing down the number of minutes, hours, days. The phone bill has it in minutes. It starts out as minutes, and then I just extrapolate it to hours, days, and weeks.
This particular, sketch or body of work it kept making me think of a poem, the T.S. Eliot love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and that line that's, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. And so this idea of kind of a ritual and a routine and a structure that's like underlying, everyone's lives, and how you kind of extract the meaning and the beauty from that and monumentalize these kind of personal or everyday experiences. I really enjoy that part of your work.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really interested in accumulative things, like very small things that once they're accumulating, they become, a larger story.
I think we have some images then of the series kind of in progress in your studio, which is wonderful. And you can see then the pieces that are at SAMA, some of them are hanging on the wall. And the title of the series is Exception. So I was wondering, where did that title come from, and what's the meaning behind that?
It came towards the end, and I was making these paintings on linen. I never make paintings, so part of it is just the fact that these turned into paintings as kind of an exceptional mode of working for me. And also, I think I would characterize the whole relationship as kind of an exception. It was, it was transitional. It was, yeah, I'm not going to say too much more about it, but it fit. The word fit,
That's great. And here, this is, going into a different part of the series, which we don't have on view at the museum, but I wanted to kind of give our participants like a broader view of the entire series. So this is where you created a line, right, out of that duration of the phone calls.
Right. So in this graph paper, I think 1 inch was an hour. And I just made a line that was as long as the whole 6 weeks, or 6 months, sorry, hour by hour, and filled in spaces accordingly that I was on the phone. It's not the first line I've made. I've drawn other lines. And it's a form, I think, that represents time really well. So and seeing it unravel just really, how it was on display at the Conduit Gallery in November, October, November. That sort of tangle of paper, something I'm really interested in. And also that it rolls up into a spool when it's not on display. And when it is on display, it's just this mass, and it's always different each time it's unfurled, it changes.
Mm.
It gives you basically the same form, but it's different. And then I used it as a shape. I used it as a source for imagery in those paintings, I guess that they're there in the wall. Like taking photographs and playing around with it, using photocopy transfer as a way to get the photograph onto the canvas.
I find that really interesting. In your work, there's a bit of like a conversation between analog and digital, right? Like you mentioned, photocopy transfer, or the idea of using, this, phone records that are collected, by the phone company, and then manually, writing out the minutes and the duration and creating this, line. There's, a real conversation between the artist's hand and maybe a mechanical means of tracking things. Do you see yourself kind of in between mechanical and digital, or digital and analog, or are you more leaning towards one method?
I definitely feel like my lifespan is right in the middle of analog and digital. And I would characterize myself as more analog than digital. But like the spool of paper is sort of reminiscent of how film or audio tape holds information in this very linear way. That's now, antiquated and we don't use anymore. But that I'm interested in that trend, that, the transition that I'm experiencing from having to change things that were shot on film to now digital images, and with varying levels of success. It doesn't always, things just don't always look good, when you take them from one medium to the other. But I'm also really interested in learning how to write code, like eventually. I've been talking about it for a while, but because I think the writing of code is an analog activity. It's not really a digital one, but it's used in a digital space. But the writing is really something that I'm interested in itself.
I think that makes total sense, because abstraction as this kind of language, and then with code, it goes perfectly with that, I believe. I don't think I could write code, so I'm impressed.
It seems like a natural progression for me to
Yeah,
get involved with code writing. So I'm looking forward to having the time to do that now.
that's great.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up An Kawara, the conceptual artist, who I'm sure, I know you are aware of him, and there's such similarities between your work with this idea of like recording, and particularly with text. For those of you that aren't familiar, this is An Kawara's Today series, which he executed over the span of nearly 50 years. And there's over 3,000 paintings that they reflect the date simply that he created the painting. And they're also housed in these cardboard boxes that have a newspaper clipping from that particular date. And so there's a real, I think, kinship with your work in this idea of the passage of time and recording that time. And then the openness there, that while the New York Times has a certain headline for December 6th of 1967, we all have our own associations with certain dates and certain memories that we, can bring to the work, much like I think with your piece at SAMA, we start thinking about our own daily conversations and connections in our own lives.
Right.
And so I know you said in one of our conversations that you kind of started working in this mode before you were even fully aware of An Kawara's work.
Right.
There was just kind of like this parallel ways of thinking between you two, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah, I was using a list of dates that in my work for years prior to about 6 years before I was introduced to Encore's work. And the artist that turned me on to him was Meg Webster. And when she asked me, did I know him, she was really surprised that I'd never heard of him. And no one had ever mentioned him to me before. So since then, that was like 1996, I've been a big fan of his. And I've seen these paintings mostly at Dia Beacon. There's a room of them that's constantly up. It's always on display. And they seem, the way he painted the date appears to be mechanical, but it's all by hand. He drew out each letter and, carefully painted them. And if he didn't complete the painting in the day that it was, the date that it was, he was painting it on, he would destroy the painting. So he usually finished, but if he didn't finish it, he wouldn't keep it.
Do you hold yourself to that kind of same rigorous, like you've got to finish, one per day or one per week? How do you?
No, I'm not as strict about the time of the actual work happening as Encore, but I do set myself up like with a goal for the day, and I try to I just work until I reach that goal, which would be, to complete one circle grid drawing, which takes about 5 or 6 hours to do. And before I was making the circle grids, I didn't have as much. I couldn't really finish anything in a day prior to this. But since I've been making these, they're relatively small drawings, so it's easy to complete one. And then the gratification of the accumulation of them. So I made about 136 individual circle grid drawings before the series that's at SAMA. And then the SAMA pieces, there's 6 circle grids, and there's 6 indigo drawings, and there's 6 of those square grids. The whole body of work for the pieces that are in SAMA took me about 3 months to make. The painting and the drawings, everything together.
And then the conversations, that was kind of like the legwork, right? Leading up to the drawing. So
right.
A lot of time.
That was the data. That was the data collection. I didn't realize that's what I was doing in those conversations. But the work I'm making now, like today, I am going to use all of my phone conversations during the COVID time, like since the shutdown, and not just with one person, but with all the conversations I've had, because my life is basically on the phone. Since we can't go anywhere or do anything. I'm just curious to see how much time that is.
I'm sure it's a lot.
I think so.
Yeah.
So every time I'm on the phone now, I'm like, well, this is data. I'm collecting data. It's always good. It's always useful somehow.
If we go, to the next slide, I'm kind of going back in time now. We looked at the exception series, but now we're going back to where before you were doing the circle grids, before you were using that type of data, you really started using text first in your work. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that and why you chose text, and then how it kind of has evolved into more numbers or abstract data.
Yeah, so this work is from grad school, from like 1989, and I was I was on the search, on an identity search at that time in my early 20s, and I was finding that there was more the representation that I was relating to more was in literature than it was in visual art or popular culture. And so because of that, I thought I would use text as a way of, using visual representations of text, since that's where I was finding true representation of the culture, that things I could relate to. That's how it originally started. And I was just playing around with words, like this says more, bigger, faster, really tiny in this big black space. I'm commenting on Western civilization. capitalism and, stuff that I had questions about or, an opinion about. Eventually this piece, not this one, this was a version of it, was in the collection of an investment banker, which I thought was very funny.
Very appropriate.
Yeah. But that's how, I also, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought about these also as sound pieces. So like the text is very small. Would you whisper it? I mean, it seems like a whisper, just visually. And in other pieces, I would use fonts, like text that's not handwritten. And though, I was contrasting handwritten text with printed, sort of font text as authority versus, regular people. Just thinking about it as sound.
That's really fascinating because, that's kind of like a time-based media, right? An audio component, kind of experiencing something in time. And so seeing that come out of your work really adds, a layer there that you're thinking about this as a sound. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another early text-based piece.
Yeah, this is what I meant by like the text versus the handwriting, and kind of what holds authority, what represents kind of rebellion or sort of an insurgent act of like crossing something out, replacing it. In this piece, I think I was specifically thinking about how one could be a member or a stranger, and that can turn on a dime. Like moment by moment, you can be one or the other of those two things, depending on the context.
Mm-hmm. And then in this one, you've used a variety of different texts or fonts, different languages.
Right. I specifically was interested in how these languages are not our alphabet, or the alphabet that we use in English and in Latin languages. And it says John 3:16 from the Bible. And I was curious about how in some of the cultures that are represented by these language systems, that, a Christian belief system is not the cultural belief system in the areas. But I know that Christianity is spread all over the world. So what I was really interested in is how American Christians would probably not recognize this as the basis of their belief, of their faith, when just seeing it without an explanation. And also was curious about how many ways humans have come up with writing, like how many, it's basically code unless you can read it. It feels like, straight lines, curved lines, dots and dashes have been combined to, hold meaning in lots of different ways. And seeing them all together on the wall, they all say the exact same thing. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's, perhaps abstract to us because we don't read that particular, code, but it's communicating a message. It has meaning there.
Right.
So there's two works, really, both from '94. And so then maybe was the John 3:16 kind of a transition piece for you, like going from text proper to like more towards numbers or code or abstraction into this body of work with September?
Yeah, I was curious about how all written text is connected to sound, and that I had a friend who was deaf, and I was thinking about, what about a text that doesn't have sound connected to it? Like how does it work when there's no sounds? So that's how I got interested in the floor plans, because it's a form of text. They're readable as a thing that people are familiar with, but there's no audio component to a floor plan. It's just visual. And the piece on the right or the left is part of a series called Drawing Blood, where I was using all the dates of my menstrual cycles in the work. And that's the work that Meg Webster was looking at and asked me if I knew about Encore, because there's dates in the work. That was just a way of marking time based on my body and the cycles of my body. And those pieces. Pardon?
Was that the first time you kind of like turned inward and used something, you know, personal for your subject matter?
Yes, it was. I started those drawings in 1990. And I was trying to figure out a way, because I was making those other text pieces with words, and I was wanting a way to put myself in it. I was always asked where I was in my work. Like, that was a common question my teachers would ask me. And when I figured out that I had this whole, I had written down these dates because my mother told me to, I had this whole body of information. And I was in a workshop where it was recommended that we keep a record of our cycles in a circle to honor the body. It all came together for me that I had these dates that I could then draw in circles, and started using them. So I was already using text as image, and this was just a way to connect it to myself.
That's great. I also wanted to bring up another kind of comparative. This particularly reminds me of your string installations, which we'll see next, but this work by Eva Hesse, who created these fiberglass sculptures, which are like drawings in space kind of. And there's this idea of like the presence of the body, of the body without it actually being there, of the artist creating this work. And I see that a lot in your work, this idea of representing a body or a human interaction through absence.
Yeah,
And,
that's beautiful.
Which I find really poetic. I love that.
Yeah.
If we go to the next slide, some string installations that Annette has also done. And they really, take on the architecture of the space that they're in.
I was thinking about these, and as I've made, several of them, as I'm thinking about architecture as monumental text. Like it holds so much information and meaning, and responding to it in a way that causes you to move in it differently than you would otherwise. And that's kind of what these pieces are meant to do. It's just to kind of make you move differently in a space.
Yeah, and then you're experiencing it, in time and in space, the viewer is. And so that, really feeds into the work, I think.
Right. Also the idea of using string, it comes in balls in a box, and it turns into this very large object. And then when it comes down, it's back in, I could carry it away in a shopping bag, which I love.
Yeah, there's a transformation there that, you seem to transform these kind of everyday materials into, something really monumental or really profound. If we go to the next slide, Theory, I love this piece. I asked Annette if she could find this in her archives so I could show it. But this connects with how we were talking about sound and audio, and these are actually musical notation that she got from her childhood. Was it piano lessons that you were taking?
Right. Yeah. And I was looking for a way to use music somehow. I didn't really it took a little while before I found this book. But because I was interested in sound in relation to text, it seemed like music was a natural next thing to explore. And I started using, we don't have a slide of this, but I used a digital sound analysis of John Coltrane's tune Alabama in a body of work. And that started, I mean, I loved making those pieces, but it started to feel very tight because it's all these tiny little squares. It's funny because now I'm making drawings that are tight like that, but at the time I got tired of it. And I found this book in my mother's piano bench. It had just been there for 27 years or something. And I didn't have to worry about copyright or anything like that. But that's one of the things I learned about as I was looking for scores, is that they're all copywritten and you have to get permission to use them. So for this, it was my own 7-year-old drawings of notes and stuff. And it's where I feel like I was, and we talked about this earlier, but I feel like I was introduced to abstraction in my piano lessons inadvertently. I just could not translate the theory notes to what was supposed to happen with my fingers on the keys and to what I was hearing. Like those things were all separate for me. And I think I shined in the theory notes and not so much in the rest of it. So here I am as a visual artist instead of a musician.
Well, we're glad.
Yeah.
And so now we're kind of getting to the point where you're going to start developing this circle grid kind of iconography, this form that you've been working on for the past few years. And this came out of your journaling, right? So we have here an image from your studio where the stacks of the journals are in the photographs on the left, and then the right are your corresponding kind of graph of days that you journaled and days that you did not. So like the frequency of your journaling. Did I get that right?
That's right. That's right. So I scanned, those stacks are actually, I had them open to the pages I was going to scan on a given day. And that's like a week's worth of journaling that I would scan in a day. It took about 4 months to scan all of the journals. And as I was scanning them, I made charts just to keep myself from scanning the same thing twice or forgetting to scan something altogether. And I was really interested in the charts as things were progressing. So the drawings that are next to the stacks are my first attempts at making drawings of the charts. And I just did them in square grids and was kind of interested in it. They look like very early those punch cards that computers used back whenever. I mean, I don't remember using those cards, but I remember seeing them. So I thought it was funny how I was translating something from an analog written book to a digital image and then drawing a chart that was more analog and just flip that going back and forth. But the square grids just didn't hold enough, like they didn't move enough for me. So that circle image that's right next to the grid was one of the things that inspired me to go with a circle grid, like that image there. I had those hanging all around me. And it was an easy step to take.
And so next is the circle grids. And I can see why you were, drawn to this form. There's so many, connections across time and cultures with, a concentric circles or a spiral having meaning. In particular, I've worked on our Australian Aboriginal collection at the museum, and typically kind of a spiral or concentric circles means that's where like a water hole is in the landscape, which is the life force. And I love thinking about your grids in that context, about this kind of really important form that holds so much information and meaning in these abstract compositions.
Thank you.
And then you transform it into different materials as well. So we're able to experience this in a variety of ways. I love these, transparent photo prints that are hanging here. This is an installation from 2014. Is this still referencing the journaling, this particular grid?
Yeah, those are the grids that are on paper, just photographed and printed on this transparent material. And I was interested in seeing the whole 25 years at once, which is what the installation allows you to do. And also the sense of motion that you get from looking at it straight on, like, you know, it's kind of has maybe a tornado vibe or something moving, something churning, you know.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. Absolutely.
That comes from a still image is kind of fascinating to me. And you know, this is rocks on the floor. It's like a 10 by 10 foot square. That's the month of June. I drew the whole thing on a plastic drop cloth and then laid the drop cloth on the floor and then filled in the spaces with different color rock. There's lava, the red is lava and the white is limestone.
And now, was this preserved or destroyed after the installation? It reminds me of like the sand mandala and that being this kind of fleeting process and experience, which is so beautiful.
It is gone. Yeah. when it comes down, it goes. I actually returned the rocks to the store I bought them from at the end of that exhibition because I have nowhere to store them, and I'm really not interested in hauling them around. And I can always get more of those rocks if I wanted to do it again. I probably kept the plastic map, you know, to if I wanted to reinstall it, it can happen.
Perhaps the rocks just exist in a different form then, you know, they're in a different composition somewhere, which is beautiful.
Right. They're in somebody's landscape.
Yeah.
Well, that actually was in Fredericksburg, so.
And here's one of your, a piece of public art, which is at the DART light rail station that connects, it stops at UNT, right? The campus, and goes to maybe downtown Dallas, is that right?
Yeah, so it's the UNT Dallas campus, which is in the southern sector in Dallas. And this is the blue line, is the last stop on the blue line. That it goes into downtown and probably goes past downtown somewhere north as well, but I'm not really sure of the extent of the line. But they just expanded it that far out to the University of North Texas and Dallas campus. I was invited to do this piece, and it's kind of exciting that they have work that's permanently up.
I think it works in this context so perfectly because this idea of like, you know, being on a light rail, you're like transitioning from one space to another, you're commuting, maybe that's kind of a routine of your life. But, you know, makes you start thinking about the passage of time. What was the kind of source data for this particular circle grid that you used at the DART rail?
I think I used one of the months, and I'm not sure which one. We talked about collecting some data that was more, you know, closely related to UNT Dallas, but that didn't really materialize. So I picked a month and used it.
That's great. And then I think our last slide is this wonderful, powerful new work that Annette was so generous to share with me and allow me to share with everybody else. One of her most recent circle grids, and this is commemorating George Floyd. And I wondered if you could share a bit more about this piece and what you're doing with it, because I know there's, you know, another component to it.
Right. So it's titled 526 seconds. That's the amount of time that a police officer was kneeling on the neck of George Floyd. And when that happened, I think I felt like many others that I needed to respond, you know, in some way. This is the way this is what came of it. I've used this drawing, not in this actual form because it looks too much like a target on t-shirts. I've tipped it in space and sort of put it on the side of the shirt. There's a website with the word spelled out, 526seconds.org, where shirts are available for purchase. And they are, the proceeds are going to organizations that I feel like have supported me and are, working in cultural space. And the first one is the Community Artists Collective in Houston. They're going to receive the proceeds from the first 100 shirts. And the next 100 shirts will support the Denton Black Film Festival. And as long as people buy the shirts, I'll just continue to make those donations. So there's about 25 shirts left of the first 100.
That's great.
Yeah. We should have done a slide with that website on it. Oh well.
We can send it out maybe in the chat to everybody.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you, Lana and Annette, for that conversation. You answered a lot of my questions towards the end, but we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Again, please, if you have questions, put them in the chat or just kind of wait after this one question. So I have one from David, which I think you kind of touched upon, but maybe you can go into more detail about where you are in your work and how do you feel your work is located in the current times?
So the drawings I'm making now, the grids I'm drawing now, are based on the time I've spent on the phone during this sort of pandemic shutdown, which is a lot of time. I'm just curious to see how that looks like, what a visual representation of that would be. And then this drawing that's up right now is also very current. It's a way of looking at that, that number of seconds. It's 8 minutes and 46 seconds turned into seconds, which is 526 seconds. Yeah, I feel like that there's something, and it's not just a direct reference to like Black Lives Matter, but it absolutely holds what Black Lives Matter means in that drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. A next question, who was wondering, throughout your work, meaning appears to be removed or hidden for the viewers. Is the intent to remove meaning? If yes, then what is the reason?
It's the intent is to allow space for people to bring meaning. There's, in say the drawings that are at the museum, you could look really closely at the drawings and see exactly what's going on. I mean, the minutes or the days, actually, I've forgotten how exactly I did those, but what's in the grid is written right on the drawing. So you can locate the hours of the day and see how long a phone call was. You don't have to necessarily know what was said, but the time spent is sort of leaves, knowing how much time it was kind of leaves it open for like maybe an experience that someone has had spending lots of time on the phone, and the memory of that is what I hope people take away from it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating, 100, 200 years ago, like from now in archives, and thinking about how you're mapping out these conversations for folks and how they're going to interpret it. And,
Right. That's interesting because like how well preserved the way we told time in 100 years. People 100 years from now may not understand minutes and seconds and any of hours or days or weeks or anything the way that we do. So that's just going to be a mystery to solve.
Now, how we frame things that kind of sketch you showed where you figured out how many weeks you had spent talking on the phone, you know, that makes you think of things differently than just, you know, experiencing one quick phone call after another. Once you kind of accumulate it and analyze it and look at it in different formats, you have a different perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, in the end, was it like 1.5 weeks? It's like 1.5 weeks straight if you didn't break it up. No sleeping, no eating, you know, no breaks. That's a lot of time. And time, the way we tell time is just we constructed that, we made that up. You know, it's not, you know, we just agree that it's the time we say it is. Yeah.
And then we have another question from JP, wondering if you could explain the transparent representation of houses in Houston. What inspired you?
I was mainly inspired by looking for a form of text that did not have a sound connected to it. So that's how I came to drawing floor plans as a way of communicating something that would be recognizable, but without a sound connected to it. Because I was saying I have a friend who is deaf, and I was trying to understand how language works when you don't have a sound to connect. I mean, I don't, it's hard for me to understand that. So the floor plan pieces were a way to explore a text that didn't have sound, and was also something we can all relate to. I mean, that was, those were all the floor plans of places I lived up to that point. And so it was sort of my autobiography in floor plan in those works. And that piece was just one of many. I mean, there's lots of other work I did using those images. That one is called Chronology, and it's a combination of all of the things. And also has a sort of quilt-like feeling to it, which because of that, I started using quilt patterns as a form of text for another body of work.
Couple more questions. So from Suzanne, other co-curator of Texas Women. Hey there.
Suzanne. Hi, Suzanne.
She's wondering that, you know, you have a stellar career as an educator. So what's your teaching philosophy, especially with MFA students?
You know, everybody comes with their own set of interests and sensibilities, and I feel like my job is to pay attention and listen, and then make suggestions and provide references and resources and guide as much as I can. I mean, I think that's what I had a great teacher when I was in grad school. His name was Sal Scarpitta, and he would come in the studio, look around, not say anything, and then like put his finger right on the exact thing that I needed to hear. We'd have a short conversation, and then he would leave. And I was like, how do you do that? You know, I've always tried to teach like
that. From Catherine Lee, it's a little Texas Women family here. Powerful work, and that so much of your work seems to address ways of communicating, everything from maps to music notation to journaling, coding, calendaring. She's taken by the linearity of your process and historical terms, like the strips of paper and the references there. How intuitive is your process? Because to Catherine, it feels very organic and deeply personal, but clearly you're taking into account historical and even art historical references.
So what was it? How what is my process?
How intuitive is your process?
Intuitive.
Yeah.
I think it's a mix. I think it's both. I mean, I am sort of following my nose. I'm just kind of feeling my way. I normally don't know what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I'm just kind of feeling it out and seeing how it works. I really enjoy, you know, that not knowing and finding out. That's kind of what keeps me interested in what I'm making. But I'm also paying attention to the news, and I'm paying attention to daily events and, my own habits. I'm kind of analytical in a sense of just, the way that I'm paying attention to things and counting things that would never normally not be counted, things that are just, mundane and uninteresting until you pay attention to them, and then they can be made interesting. I think that's how I work. Did I answer that?
Well, it feels good to me. I don't know. I don't know if Catherine feels that way.
We can talk later.
I think if that's everyone's, that's all the questions there are. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then we can kind of see everybody. Boom. So again, thank you so much for tuning in to our last Texas Women Artist Conversation. It's been a great summer. And please, again, check out the exhibition that is on view until September 6th. Thank you so much, everyone. And see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you all. It was fun. Do we just sign off? Is that what happens now?
Yeah, I'm going to do it for everyone. So I just have to figure that out.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks a
Okay,
lot.
thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Ciao.